Alright, so welcome to the Saturday School, everybody. Today we have Huzaifa, who's the creative director and co-founder of Hypernove Interactive. So his journey started about 15 years ago when he wanted to pursue a master's degree in video game design from DSK Super Info Game in Pune. And then in 2015, he started his own studio, and we have them in the building. So over to you, Faisal.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. Appreciate you all showing up. So today's talk is going to be obviously about polishing a game. I lied. I was going to keep it, for dummies, but last minute I changed it for pros. So a little bit about me and the studio. I've been making games for well over 15 years now. Currently, I'm at Hypernove Interactive. We are making India's first open world game, Mayan agree, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm here to talk about, polish. What is polish? A lot of people actually have different ideas of polish, but I think I would like to ask the audience. So, what are your ideas about polish? What do you think it is? Anyone?
When the game feels just right. Like, when player plays your game and he's satisfied or the player is satisfied, then you say the game is polished.
All right. So you mean satisfaction, player satisfaction. Anyone else?
Feedback. Whenever a player does any action, there should be a feedback which feels natural.
Great.
Refining things.
Refinement. All right.
Like it's the flow of the experience.
Okay.
And all the mechanics working as expected.
Okay. So I guess the answer is all of it. So polish is feedback, polish is visual, polish is how tightly your game mechanics feel, how precise and responsive your controls are. Polish manifests in everything. And to be honest, each and every one of these blocks could be its own talk. But what I'm going to talk about today is something that is less of a solved problem. Like you give a 10-year-old, 10 years experienced artist your 3D model to make, and he'll pretty much nail it down. But when it comes to something like feedbacks, right, that's a much more gray territory. You may or may not get it right. So the whole idea of today's talk is how do we teach polish through some visual examples, some practical examples. And this is a problem that I had at our studio. So back when we were doing some projects for some of our partners, depending on the designer, the quality of the game would turn out differently, and it would require a lot more involvement towards the end of the project, and it would take a lot more time. So we were like, okay, why don't we come up with a framework that makes it more predictable. So instead of the first draft of the game feeling like a 30 out of 10, it should feel like a 70 out of 10. So this presentation is just a reflection of that framework, and I'll walk you guys through it. So hopefully the end result would be you guys will have some takeaways that you'll be able to apply to your own prototypes, right? So we've all seen prototypes, game prototypes that kind of look like this, programmer colors. They don't have any action in them, nothing that is there. Like the mechanics are all there, like it's all working, but it feels like this, right? So right off the bat, I think the very first thing you could do to fix and make this feel better is just add better colors, right? Now, if you look at this, I've used more pastel shades. The game still does not have personality, but at least it feels a lot better to look at. There is some, visual theming going on. One of the tools that I recommend people use is Adobe Cooler, or Cooler, whatever they call it. Basically, it's a website that allows you to get color palettes that work with each other. It'll give you color harmony at the end of it. So the other thing that I would like to do on top of colors is add some personality. Now, obviously, this is a block crush game, and I made this in 2 days, so I wouldn't want to go overboard with it. But the simple idea was that what if these tiles were elemental blocks, right? So there's fire, water, electricity, all of that, and add like a nice gradient background. So when the user is playing it, they get this feeling of calm and soothness, right? It's the same game again, but already it's looking and feeling a lot better. Um, what about adding some motion? Every time you start the game, you have some motion, um, but this motion still feels bland. If you look at it, the motion is just like one linear page coming down. Um, one thing about human minds is that we are really good at filtering out patterns. So if we see a pattern, we immediately ignore it. You guys are probably seeing there's an AC vent over here, and you probably cannot hear it right now because you're not paying attention to it, because it's just a general hum and you're filtering it out. Something similar happens visually as well. You're filtering out anything that is very predictable. So what you want to do is break out of that monotony. This feels a lot more interesting, right? Like what we did was we made a bunch of cascading effects and made them fall over each other at different timings. You could make this a lot more interesting by adding, say, scale effects, rotate effects, add a little bit of a random delay. So that would feel a little more chaotic. But for the theme and the context of this game, I thought it would be nice if everything fell in one sequence, but in a cascaded way, right? Everyone's mileage varies. Your prototype might have different requirements, right? This is another thing that I feel a lot of people don't do. Most of the experienced developers know about it, but the people who are just getting started, they need to start using easing curves, and not just the basic ones, something more interesting and advanced. So over here, if you can see, there are easing curves that basically is the same movement. The duration of one object going from 0 to 1 will be the same. It will be 1 second, but does it go like this or does it go like zoop, right? That's the difference, and that is what makes things look interesting again. All of these are small things that add up to your game's polish. The other thing that I would like to talk about is physicality. Now, it's very easy to make things disappear and not justify it, but it's a lot better if I destroyed these blocks and they fell on top of each other as if they exist in a latent space. And that feels a lot more nice to look at, right? So add physicality wherever possible, and this can apply to both your game elements and your UI. So instead of having, say, a window that comes in, what if the window pushes in whatever was coming in and whatever is there? That would feel a lot better. So physicality is a very key thing to make sure that your game feels like it is mimicking the real world, and that's very important. Then one more thing we can do is add chain reactions. So instead of just making everything disappear, um, you could make things go away one by one. And again, this adds to the feel of things feeling grander. Obviously, you don't want to just leave things at chain reactions. You want to actually add some effects to the thing. So if it's a fire tile that I'm destroying, you get a bunch of fire particles, or if it's a water particle, that's what happens. Same thing for electricity, right? Or the green ones. The idea is that this again goes back to the personality bit, where you add to the theme of the game, and you can see how slowly this thing that started off with just red, green, and yellow cubes is now something a lot more than that, right? So particles is a very cheap way of adding juice to your game. It's you can't have enough particles. Let me be honest. You can't get that wrong. Now, obviously, all of this feels dead if you don't have any physical reaction or sounds. Now, the reason sounds are extremely important in games is because that's your only way of the game uh, taking over one entire sense, right? We have five senses. Out of that, one entire sense is sound. So now if I destroy a bunch of blocks, okay, all right, I think there are some audio issues, but you guys can probably hear this. I hope it's reflecting on the screen. But just adding a few sounds gives you a lot more mileage out of the same action. Now, adding sounds is not enough. People want to know validation for whatever actions they are doing, right? The game kind of needs to hold their hand and congratulate them for any desirable actions they might make. So here's some UI feedback. Like for example, if I'm just breaking like 2 or 3 blocks, it's fine. You just show me the score, right? But if I'm breaking like 5 or 6 of them, just say that, oh, this is amazing, or it's great, or something on those lines. The whole idea is congratulate the player, celebrate whatever he's doing. That will really, really make the player feel like, you know what, I want to play this game a little more because I feel good. Again, these are small, cheap tricks, but they all add up, right? Then obviously this is something that is very easy to overuse, and that is called screen shake. Now, like we talked about sound was taking over one sense. Screen shake is something that that is your way of making the player feel like they did something really, really huge. And what I mean by screen shake is something like this. So as you can see, every time there is a bunch of destruction happening, the entire screen shakes. It's subtle, but it's very easy to overdo it. The whole idea is that every time the player has done something significant, you can shake the screen proportionally, and that will make the player feel as if they have affected the world a lot more than they should have. And that, again, that goes back to feeling good. Movie directors use this trick a lot, even in movies. Like you could see, like for example, there's this really famous movie called Pacific Rim. What they did was every time a huge robot walks around, they would shake the screen, right? You would have seen this in Jurassic Park or even Godzilla. So that's just to show the enormity of what's happening around you, and the same principle applies over here. Nothing new. So screen shake was the last thing. And I think one more thing you can do is post-processing. Now, in a game like this, you would probably not want to use this, but I have put this here anyway so that you guys get the principle. The idea of post-processing is quite simple. Different games demand different kinds of art styles. And in most engines, post-processing is literally a 2-minute fix. So over here, I've just given a simple bloom effect. So every time I do something nice, something elaborate, you can see that's glowing a lot more, and it just feels a lot more juicy, and it just pops out more. But normally you want to achieve this effect through artistic ways rather than a post-processing effect. But again, your mileage will vary. If you are working on a AAA title, you probably want to use a filter on top. But when it comes to a small casual game like this, you're probably better off putting all of this stuff inside of the art assets itself. So I think when you look at all of these effects, right, you can look at personality, you can look at colors, audio, full screen effects. All of these are your ways of shaking the player's apathy. None of this will matter if your game is running. Obviously, this goes hand in hand with the rest of the pieces in your game. Like if your tech is not good, your game is not running at 60 FPS, none of this will matter, right? So polish will, again, I'll go back to the fact that polish will go hand in hand with your art. It will go hand in hand with your game mechanics and your tech. But when it comes to feedback, this is really how you can get the most out of it. And again, these are just some of the points. It may differ from context to context. And let's just do like a A/B test. So this is what it was before. Again, pretty simple, pretty boring. And now let's enable everything all at once. So I hope you guys can hear this. So it took us literally less than 10 minutes to enable all of these things. Took me 1 day to build all of this out. But the whole idea is that instead of going ahead and showing your team a prototype like this, you could be spending a couple of days more and showing them something like this and increasing your chances selling your idea, because that's what is your job as a game designer, right? Again, I believe polishing is something that can be done infinitely, and it's very hard to, you grow more critical. Something that looks fresh to you right now, 3 months down the line, you might feel like, oh, okay, this is whatever, I don't like it. But you show it to a new person with fresh eyes, they might appreciate it. So it's very easy for a person who has been working on a game for months to end up feeling like his game is not polished. But never look at it from your own perspective. Always go out there and get feedback from others, especially your target audience, right? See what they feel about it. Your industry peers are very good place to actually ask them for feedback on how you could polish your game more. But just like everything, even financial investments, polish is a diminishing returns equation. So the first 0 to 70 will take you a few days, but the 70 to 80 might take you an entire month, and then 80 to 90 might take you 3 months, right? You want to know where you're going to draw the line, and it totally depends on how much budget you have. There are some really good talks out there, some really good books. Juice It or Lose It, it's a classic talk. People all over, game designers all over the world kind of refer to it as a Bible. In fact, I've based some of my material on that. Art of Screen Shake by Lambir, again, very good talk. Go watch it after this. And there's a few more, right? So the whole idea is that your game, every game demands a little different context, right? The way you would polish an FPS game is a lot more different than the way you would polish a puzzle game versus something which is more on the multiplayer side. Really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So just don't fall into the trap of feeling like, oh, I'm not gonna add, that extra 1 week to, add 50% more juice to my game. Juice is really important, because ultimately games are toys, and if people don't enjoy playing with toys, they will not play your game. That's all for now. Thank you so much.
Can you also talk a little bit about what do you think about creating a library of your tools, assets, which allows you to move fast and build prototypes? Because one critical item about prototyping is you have to put a time constraint also. You might not have time for it.
Correct. So that's actually a pretty good idea. Making a lot of these effects, right? They are pretty standard. So you could go ahead and, at least in our studio, we have a small library for UI effects for particle systems. So it's much simpler for us to just go ahead and import a package like that. And with one line of code, I can make something look really blinky, right? So that's totally something that every studio, I think, should practice, because it establishes a baseline expectation of quality, and the excuse for not doing it is pretty much not there then. Like, you can just say that, hey, if this is showing up, you could have instead added one more line of code, and it would have looked so much better. So packages are very good way of doing it.
Another question I had.
Yeah, sure.
Yes. So one of the mistakes I have seen studios making is taking their prototype to production. What are your thoughts? Like, there are positive, negative both.
Correct.
What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. So I think it really depends on how who's making the game. So I've seen prototypes developed by really good engineers, and those guys somehow have the habit of writing good code, even if it's a prototype code, right? So I think it depends on how hygienic the project is. If it's something that you think is a good solid foundation that you can build on top of, I would say just go ahead and do it, and you might end up saving one entire month. But if you think this is going to be a long-term project, something that you're going to run for a couple of years, and a lot of people are going to work on this during the life cycle of the whole game, I think it's just better to go ahead and start from scratch, plan it very well, and that way you give your artists an opportunity to plan how they can re-envision the whole thing, right? So that's something very important, because normally what happens is game designers, they will have the entire vision of the game in their mind, but they don't have a very good ability to communicate that to the artists or the programmers. But if after a prototype everyone has suddenly come on the same page, so it's a good opportunity for a meeting of minds at that point, that an artist can start imagining what the game could be, and a programmer can start imagining what the architecture should be, and then they all come together, and then they start with a solid foundation that allows everyone to flex their muscles. So
Thank you.
that's my advice on that.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so basically, like as we go forward in polishing, right? So it's like more resource consumption.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we draw the line?
Okay.
I just said like polishing is a iterative process. You can just
Correct.
go on and on.
Correct.
And the more you polish, the more resource consuming the game becomes, the effects and everything.
Correct.
So what are your thoughts on it? Like how do we decide where is the line?
Okay. So by resource, you mean time as a resource, or
No, like I mean like the
performance?
technical resources that it is consuming. Like particle effects will definitely take
Correct.
some
Correct.
consume some resources on the mobile.
Got it. So that's a pretty good question. So in our studio, what we do is we set up budgets for everything. So there would be a draw call budget, there would be a disk space budget, there would be a font budget. Anything that is going into the game, there has to be a budget, and people have to justify it. Otherwise, it will show up in the profiling. So um, obviously, the line that has to be drawn has to be done by the CTO or whoever the technical leadership of the company is, because otherwise people will just go wild, and next thing you know, it's not running on anything lesser than a PS5, right? So having guidelines on what is the amount of materials, fonts, post-processing effects, number of textures that you can use, that is the way to prevent that from happening. If it's not there in the project, then you won't use it. And as far as even let's just say something as simple as, like you said, particle systems, right? So at a production, that gets controlled at two levels. One is when you're making the particle asset. So normally, again, in most studios, you would say that, okay, I need this fire effect, but I don't want you to use more than 20 particles emitted at any given point of time. So regardless of how big or small the effect has to be, the artist will go ahead and make sure that it's achieved in that much. It may not be the best, but it will get the job done, and it will stay in the budget.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When should we start polishing the game? Like when should we think that now my prototype is ready?
Okay.
I think I'm in the right point and I should start polishing. When should we have that work?
I think polishing is less of a process and more of a vision. So I think you have to start from the very beginning itself, like small things that add up incrementally. Because if you say that, hey, I'm going to make my game look like a prototype till the very end, and then last minute I'm going to take out 1 month to polish it, what you're really doing is you're accumulating design debt, and that will burn out your team or anyone who's trying to improve the overall experience of the game. That will also, in many cases, blow up your QA cycles big time, because something that was not a problem all along in the game, and now, that guy said that if you add more particles and suddenly you have frame rate drops and people don't know why that is happening, till you profile, you will end up increasing problems unnecessarily. So it's better that you always add things incrementally as you go, because that's the core rule of getting things done, right? If something can be done in less than 10 minutes, just do it right away. Don't schedule it for much later, right? And you'll get a lot of these ideas. A lot of these ideas will not get captured, in fact. So it's just better that you capture them, or even better, implement them so that they are there, and make sure that they're in the limits. Anything else?
Yeah, I have just one small question.
Yeah, sure.
Like, what is a good way to profile games?
Good way to profile.
Yeah, in terms of like their memory consumption. So, for example, profiling is also related to scaling, right? I mean, you profile a game once on a single system or whatever, but when you push it out, when you export it, things change.
Okay.
So, what's the right moment you should profile it, or is it like what is a good way to profile things? Profile the game.
Normally, the best way to do it is after every feature, every major beat that you add in the game. It's a good exercise to profile it. The reason is it gives you a good opportunity to nail down the problem right before it becomes a problem, and it starts hiding alongside other features. And this has happened a lot of times where we use, say, some sort of a Git or Perforce kind of a version control. 2-3 people are working on different branches. They all do a merge. Everything goes to hell, and you don't know where your problems are coming from, right? So what you want to do is profile it at individual branch level, and make sure that no one is being the culprit, because once you merge, it gets really difficult, and sometimes your problems might arise due to interactions between multiple systems. So at least you can be sure that there's nothing wrong with the system itself. There might be something wrong with the architecture of how the systems are interacting with each other. So
Just one
follow
up on this.
Sure.
So you said that the profiling should be done on a branch level, right?
Yeah.
So are there any tools that do it automatically for branches on GitHub or someplace which anyone could just use and define how they want to do it? So that in the pull request itself or somewhere you just get a feedback instead of depending on the developers doing it on their own PC first and then putting out the result.
I mean, on GitHub, you have some automations that you can plug in. You can even have your own build system that, every time you have a major commit that you absorb into the main branch, you make a build, it will profile the whole thing, automatically spit out the results, and if the results are below a certain benchmark, you can reject that entire PR. So you can go through a process of accepting or rejecting PRs, but again, that's more on the technical side rather than the design and polish side.
Okay. Anyone has any more questions? Okay, do we have any questions online, Akash? Do you have any questions online?
All right.
All right, so that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Huzaifa. Thank you everybody for joining us.
All right, thanks everyone.
It was really good.